Good morning, everybody. Uh, Here we are again, facing a thankfully fairly quiet week, relatively speaking, because I got sort of snowed in with work this week and didn't manage to get to a lot of the update details that I would like to. So uh, we have had time to get only a couple of little stories in, but thankfully it's been relatively quiet on the national stage. But this week we have seen some broader trends sort of come to fruition, as well as a couple of nice little reports. So there's a fun report which has, well, I say fun, it's actually quite dismal, come out of the Organized Crime Index. There are a number of moves that the administration has made with China at the G20, and yeah, there's a big tourist boom still going on in the Western Cape as usual, but it's this is whether it's the best news is debatable. But yeah, we have a couple of things to discuss. But I wanted to start off with, and David's been kind enough to point me in this direction. Because I would have forgotten about this, but we have we have a bit of a problem with discussing with the issues that are happening between America and South Africa. Okay, and it's a framing issue. So at the moment, a lot of people will be aware of the state-sponsored public relations move that was made, with where they got a bunch of left-leaning pro-regime Afrikaners to say that AfriForum and Solidarity are profoundly at fault and there's nothing wrong in South Africa. Everything is absolutely hunky-dory. Minorities are not being discriminated against or persecuted in any way, shape, or form. Now, I think that this is, if it wasn't so
Disingenuous.
transparently a state-funded, if it wasn't so transparently a state-funded move, this would be very difficult to counteract. But even considering the fact that it's just straight up state-sponsored and organized propaganda, coordinated with partially state-owned media, there's an awful amount of grip that it's managed to get on the discourse, especially considering that Donald Trump has leaned into the frame that the left has been choosing for us for the past 10 years. Some of you might remember a documentary by a woman called Lauren Southern that came out in 2015, 2016, around then. And she was the first person to call what was going on in South Africa a white genocide. Now, this is largely because there was a mildly hysterical moment that understand emotionally it's understandable, but it was a slightly over emotional moment with one of the victims of farm attacks. And he said that it's a genocide, we're being wiped out. And I thought, okay, this is a problem because this is clearly not what's going on. It is violent persecution. Yes, there's a racial angle. Yes, but for the most of us live in reasonably comfortable environments, protected by private security or highly homogenous neighborhoods with neighborhood watches and so on and so forth. So most of us are fairly insulated. And if you understand the crime statistics, white South Africans actually have a 3 in 100,000 homicide victimization rate. Now, the vast majority of those homicide victims are killed by strangers, which is very unusual criminologically. Every other community in South Africa, you're far more likely to be killed by a family member or a friend or an acquaintance. White people are the only group where you're more likely. We don't know about what Indians are like because the study in question didn't have a large enough sample size
Can
for the
I
Indian
can I
population.
can I just share a little anecdotal story on that, just to highlight that?
Sure.
No, it's quite an interesting one. So I used to be friends with this chap that lived in Langa Township, and his mother started was doing very well at her job. She started to make more money. The neighbor got jealous, poisoned his mother, killed his mother, and then that neighbor somehow managed to wangle her way into his mother's job. True story.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of evil in the world, and what is missing is that we have an understanding that's developed from centuries of being disciplined by the state. Our culture comes out of 8 or 900 year process of discipline and punishment, which you can read. There's a good study by a man called Emmanuel Eisner, published in 2003, called "Long Term Trends in Violence, Violent Death." I'm not sure exactly what the title is. It's a very sort of descriptive, plain one. But he basically took samples across all of Western Europe to track the evolution of homicide, uh, and showed that the rate of homicide starting, in 1300 or 1200 is roughly where you find South Africa today, and takes, a very, very long time to descend to the idyllic peace that you see in the 1950s. Very long. It's been kind of reversing since then, but not hugely dramatically when you consider the starting point. Now, part of the problem is that we're living in a society which hasn't gone through that process, and that process involves, the death penalty. It involves very, very strict application of the law for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But what we do have is we have a relative wealth which allows us to insulate ourselves from the society that has yet to have gone through that transformative process. Now, what is happening in South Africa, and what makes what we're facing a particular threat, is that the radical redistribution of property and the forcible integration of communities removes all of those asset classes, and abilities to earn money in a fair labor market, which gives us the ability to protect ourselves and insulate ourselves from the violence in South Africa. So it is fairly serious, because I think exposing anyone to what is happening in South Africa is a terrible idea, and increasing the number of people who are victims of crime is bad. So I'm not for that, and it is in our interest to stay out of the way. So, but it's also, at the same time, the reforms that have been gradually grinding their way through the past 20 odd years, so they don't actually improve matters on the ground regarding crime and wealth inequality and so on and so forth. So the argument really doesn't work to defend the system. But what's really troublesome is the nature of the discussion that's happening. So remember the Lauren Southern documentary. What's brought up when they say genocide? Obviously, there's no genocide, but things are very bad. There are a lot of bad things happening for rural communities, for Afrikaner farmers in particular, and there's a lot of racial discrimination that makes getting ahead in life quite difficult, and places a lot of pressure on us, because we understand what happens if you drop out of the middle class, and that is you have to endure the dire situation that faces people in these townships, only as a minority that is going to face persecution and social alienation. If you see or interview anyone if you talk to anyone who is a white person living on those margins, an admittedly small portion of our population, but still, they face a kind of persecution that's difficult to avoid. Now, when Donald Trump starts bringing up this white genocide problem, he is now played into a frame that has been adopted by foreign-funded PR activists for a decade. So there's a group called I can't. What are they called? Stop white something.
Are you talking about Genocide Watch? Not
no,
Genocide
it's
Watch.
not Genocide Watch. They're a bunch of lefty activists.
Yeah, Genocide Watch.
I can't remember their name, but there's a group of them, and they've been pushing this whole thing of like, mainly sort of railing against conservative Afrikaners, maybe railing against anyone who's got an issue with farm murders or land reform or expropriation or black economic empowerment or employment equity or any of these sort of racialized and redistributive policies. And uh, part of the problem is that everything gets now framed in terms of, is there or is there not a genocide? And if there's not a genocide, you have nothing to complain about.
Mm.
Now, this is completely psychopathic, because it means that
Mm.
literally it doesn't matter what is happening to you. If half of you are still alive, you have nothing to complain about. Like, it's an extraordinary moral standard, right? Now, now, this is a hysterical sort of comparison I'm going to make, and so I would like everyone to bear with me for a moment. But Germany in the interwar period, during the early stages of the National Socialist government, they had a bunch of quotas that they imposed on hiring and business ownership and key sectors of the economy, and land reform and property reform and so on, right? And right up until 1938, despite all of these policies, Jewish Germans actually had a higher average wealth than German people. And what happened in 1938 is it's Kristallnacht. They went and smashed all of their shops, expelled them out of everything, pushed them into the ghettos. And within a couple of years, they were being used for slave labor and being, ground into death on the eastern frontier. So, what has to be borne in mind in all of this is that what we are concerned about, admittedly, we're not living in Nazi Germany. We really aren't. But there is a prevailing risk, which has been seen elsewhere in southern Africa before, in several countries, where not only the white minority, but other ethnic minorities get expelled after a large period of economic and political tension. And the really scary part is that it usually occurs after some kind of power sharing arrangement. So ZANU and ZANU PF got rid of the Matabele shortly after having a power sharing arrangement with them. Um, the uh, the Hutus got rid of the Tutsis after 3 years of a power sharing arrangement with them. And what happens is, over and over again, you see some kind of pact where a majority and a minority share government for a little while, and then the minority becomes a target shortly afterwards, because you can't work miracles out of compromise. So, and usually you only enter in those coalitions because of some kind of political crisis. In this case, the loss of legitimacy and the fragmentation of the ANC at a time at which the economy is stagnant and deindustrializing. So we're headed for perhaps not as extreme a scenario as the rest of Africa, but certainly there is a crisis coming. And very few people have been able to give any kind of bright, optimistic reason to believe otherwise. As much as I respect Franz Grenier, I don't buy his rose tinted view of our economy and our political system. And more to the point, when we discuss farm murders, we have a very peculiar culture over here, where once you start discussing farm murders, everyone says a whole bunch of things. They say, like, oh, well, it affects others. It's not really a race issue. Okay, fine. But it does affect Afrikaners. Farming is deeply part of their identity. Why wouldn't they complain about it? It affects them, so let them complain about it. And it's obviously a serious problem, and it affects others. Why wouldn't you want to find solutions to it? Why is this an illegitimate thing to complain about? Right? Why does this irritate you? If you work with these people, you can solve rural crime, right? Or at least make it a little bit better. But people are insisting that we do nothing. We mustn't even engage. This must be an area in which we don't touch. So the suffering must continue, because some of it is affecting someone we really, really hate. And that little bit of pain, well, it's not a little bit, it's a fair amount. It's a huge amount of pain and suffering. That amount of pain and suffering that we can cause those we resent and those we are sanctioned to hate, Afrikaners, for example, that amount of pain that we see inflicted is worth the pain that everyone else suffers. Because the most important thing to critics of, Afrikaner actors, the most important thing to them is the suffering. The suffering is the good. They want to maximize suffering in all circumstances. because they're evil. And you will watch it. Doesn't matter which policy you pick in South Africa. Okay, they'll agree that it's horrible. BEE is terrible. It's stupid. It's corrupt. Affirmative action is destroying our skills base. Okay, it's all bad. Like everyone knows it's all bad, but they won't stop it because the important point is to hurt the minority and to punish
Yeah.
them. And
So that's
it's suffering is something that is maximized under our system. We're trying our best to produce the worst of all worlds. And those who
in terms
criticize
of
the right wing are trying their best to preserve horrible, hurtful systems because some of that hurt is landing on the people we are allowed and encouraged to hate. That's how it's working.
in terms of that of BE, I saw a very interesting X post by he's what's his name? Pen something? The Black Pen? What's his
Oh,
name?
Penwell. I mean,
Pen,
but look,
Pen.
Penwell, he's
Which
got that whole sort of, he's got
I
that
thought
sort of interesting BCP sort of
I thought
black consciousness streak in him.
yes, I thought it was a very interesting comment where he basically said, and I'll have to find it, but he basically said the problem with BEE is not that it's racist, but that it is basically corrupt and that those it should be benefiting, it's not benefiting. So he doesn't, from what I gathered from that, he doesn't see BEE as unequal scales, as I argued in a piece actually
No,
using
no,
the
no.
Bible.
He does. He thinks. I mean, look, all of these people agree that racial discrimination is good, right? Because you've got to
Yeah,
hurt
so
white people. That's the
yeah, so
important part. It's like everything else comes secondary to that initial consideration. It's not how do we fix the lives of the poor. It's can we start with the assumption that we have to hurt white people, and then we can move on to everything else. This is the basic conceit of all political dialogue in South Africa is spite. It is if you are not
it's the
spiteful,
politics
you are
of envy.
illegitimate.
It's the
Yeah, no,
politics of envy.
correct. But I make it more specific. If your policies do not spite someone, then you are not legitimate. That is how our system works. And it is there's a lot of parts of the world which have this problem. And it's a problem in all pluralistic societies. All societies where you have contested identities, the politics of resentment and the politics of spite are primary. Okay, and the only way you can overcome that is by abolishing democracy. But that's not going to happen. So we're in a particularly bizarre and ugly bind. So now, I think that's all worth noting. But for me, it's like, well, the two questions are very, very simple. If you're confronted with this discussion of genocide, it's like, well, you say, well, do we have to wait for a genocide before our complaints are legitimate? That's the question. And then the other one is, if farm murders are affecting everyone, then why not work with AfriForum and Solidarity to solve it? Why are we not trying to work with them? Why are we not trying to build a formal framework for solving these things? Right? Those are the two questions you need to be asking of any interlocutor who's causing problems for you on this. It's like, forget trying to argue the facts. Just establish the principle that their approach is bananas. It's absolutely it's psychopathic. It's psychopathic. Saying, well, you're only allowed to complain if all of you are dying. No, it's too late then. I'm sorry. And I mean, it's just bananas. I mean, they don't even hold the same standard for this. I mean, it doesn't matter. But yeah, no, I think I'd like to. I don't mind if you don't mind, David. I'd like to move on from this because I really don't like this topic.
No, sure. I just think it's very
Hmm.
important for people to understand that currently there is no white genocide. We need to say that currently there is no white genocide, but what there is in our economic bloc, because South Africa is an economic bloc, in our economic bloc, we do have rising mistrust between groups, and we do have what you could call like anti-white policies, or there is something that's very evil that's happened. and
Yeah.
we need to talk about those specifics. But we do need to frame it as though currently there is no white genocides, but
Uh,
there is
but I
rising
but
mistrust,
I don't
and
even I
they
don't even want to worry about. I don't
yeah.
even want to sort of bother with confessing to the other person that they are correct. It's like you
No,
step
no, I'm
right
not
over the
confessing. No,
question.
I'm not confessing. I'm
No, I mean I
using
step right over the question and just say, well, does there have to be a genocide? Why does it? Why is that even a question? Like is that the only thing worth complaining about? So, uh,
no, sure. I guess it's more my scientific brain because I studied chemistry where I have to work at it in a logical way. So,
yeah, no,
I
that's the
and
problem. Is human beings are not logical.
I'm
Mm.
I'm not confessing it. I'm just saying categorically it's not. But there are serious issues, and I would just call general anti-white sentiment. That's
Yeah.
I would
No, it's
frame
a
it.
problem.
Okay,
But
well let's jump
yeah,
on.
no, I think one of the more interesting things we got, I mean, because okay, now that's America out of the way. I mean, America. The thing
Yeah,
is, America's not doing anything, right?
yeah.
Not for us, anyhow. Most of what they're doing, I think everyone will recognize, is kind of not in our favor. And it's also not in their favor. What they're doing to South Africa is driving us more to China. And what has been disappointing to watch is that Solidarity and AfriForum have gotten no meaningful concessions out of this process and have kind of hurt their brand. And you, whether or not, like, my sort of perspective on this is, of course, people who are serious supporters of them are never going to go away. But there's sort of like a normie background level of they're looking to them for practical solutions. So they're willing to tolerate the controversy and the vitriol that gets tossed around in South Africa up to a point. And then at a certain point they feel like, well, they don't want to be on the wrong side of an issue that is being acrimoniously discussed. And the momentum, because of the size of our society and the size of our minority groups, the momentum is generally going to be on the side of those who are against us because we are minorities. And so if there's a divisive issue which causes contention, you don't want to be on the wrong side of it because that normie base, that sort of ordinary person that is right in the middle and doesn't like being political, whose support is required for the movement, is going to feel somewhat intimidated by the vitriol that passes around in social media or in everyday life. And you don't want that to get too intense. The problem with Donald Trump is that he has been communicating in a way that, in our context, is extremely unreasonable and hysterical. I don't think anyone can deny that. And it hasn't done us any favors. It would be fine if, in the process, we got tangible concessions from the South African government, but we haven't. Instead, the ruling coalition, which essentially functions as a single party, um, they have basically said, well, they've distanced themselves from Afrikaners as an ethnic group and from their representatives in the solidarity movement more generally. So there's like this hardened position here now, and the government has, and Donald Trump's not using any of the leverage that he could have to get any concessions. Um, we've moved, we've moved over to China, and what I sort of noticed over here is that, I mean, it's sort of slow, but they've kind of formalized it a little bit. They've kind of formalized it's a very long running relationship that we have with China, but they've given it a bit of a sort of more comprehensive gloss. Um, and so, I mean, I wrote an article on this earlier this week. Because they announced a new cooperation initiative called there's like this 10 partnership thing. Like there's the Chinese like a number and a concept, and they have a forum on China Africa cooperation. And so they announced this new partnership, and it's the usual stuff that you see at the G20, where it's a little bit of debt relief, a little bit of investment in technology and grid solar and so on. But the Chinese investment technology is mainly, rural off-grid solar power and stuff like that, and it's not, um, it's not that all of the things they've been doing so far are very big or that what's coming is massive, but there's this concerted, slow move towards accruing a more and more support and trade and investment. But there are a couple of small things that are like missing. So one thing that you'll notice is that Standard Bank has opened a renminbi trade corridor, so you can now trade across African renminbi, and so for big businesses that are doing interfacing with China, Standard Bank is becoming a bigger gateway. Now they had a major boon as a result from the Congolese war recently because South Africa secured a financing deal where Standard Bank would finance, and Standard Bank has said that this is literally the core of their entire strategy for the continent now. When this deal was struck, so in exchange, and as far as I can see, the quid pro quo, South Africa will send their troops to try and fight the Rwandan proxies in eastern Congo, and in exchange, the DRC will give our mining cartel access to Katanga province and the rich minerals there. And the financing comes from Standard Bank. But now Standard Bank is a partnership between Chinese and Western investors. It used to be a British thing. It's been around for like
Yeah.
a very long time since the 19th century. So it's a very old institution. But what you're seeing now is that they're opening renminbi trade. So now Africa isn't a huge amount of international trade, but it's a big signal for de-dollarization. The de-dollarization protocol that the Chinese wanted to do with BRICS was shelved when Trump started his trade war with them, or should I say renewed. But the negotiations over trade deals between America and China has not gone America's way, and they've backed down on a lot. So I think China's sort of like testing the waters now with de-dollarization again. Because initially they even got Saudi Arabia to sign up to this, and there were some very optimistic public communications from that part of the world on de-dollarization. But to see it in South Africa is something. I mean, one has to remember uh, AGOA is coming to a close, both because we no longer have the sympathy of the American government, and also because we, for a long while now, have graduated out of several of the key criteria regarding national income level in order to participate in this. So AGOA is coming to an end, and now we're opening up trade with China. But the problem, this is not in our favor, you see. So we think like, oh, we're getting deals and we're swapping it, but we have a trade deficit with China and we have a trade surplus with the West, right? So if the overall balance of trade goes in China's way, they're going to benefit. They also don't play fair. So we have a problem with trade misinvoicing. That's now trade misinvoicing during the sanctions period was used as a way of cheating the taxpayer so that you can get your money out by over invoicing foreign traders. But now, um, under invoicing foreign traders and then getting the money back on the other side. But what Chinese do is they're doing this to dodge taxes. And earlier this year, Temu and Shine were found to have they did this thing where they broke down all of their shipments into these micro shipments, enormous logistical operation just to cheat the tax man, right? For like a marginal market, they've got a global supply chain and they're really just gunning it for South Africa, right? I mean, it makes me think of the Americans do loss leading and debt instruments. The Chinese just cheat. So it's like the Americans cheat without cheating, the Chinese cheat by cheating. Like they just
Do you know that
brazen.
that's actually a fascinating point? They've been actually copying things or cheating things for centuries. There were actually a case where British clockmakers, uh, somehow those clocks ended up in China. And the Chinese back then would have been what, the 1800s. They were able to copy that clock exactly and create basically a copy. And so this practice of copying Western ideas and
No,
cheating,
but that's
it's
fine. That
it's
goes
it's
both
very
ways. I mean,
old.
where do you think? No, but that goes both ways. Where do you think Delftware comes from? That's the Dutch copying the Chinese pottery. What makes the Chinese different is that they will do it. They will do it in an inferior way. They didn't get obsessed with trying to copy the manufacturing processes the same way that the Dutch did. At a high level, they are very keen on producing high quality steel for aerospace purposes and advanced manufacturing. I mean, you what I remember back in 2015, they actually had a huge nationwide celebration amongst the metallurgical societies and everything because they'd finally managed to manufacture the grade of steel required to put ballpoint pens together. And now that seems like nothing to you, but that grade of steel is also has, as I say, aeronautical significance. So yeah. Um, so, look, the Chinese care about that stuff at a high strategic level, but at an ordinary fabric of society level, it's very, very hard to get a reliable deal on
Yeah.
materials because they sandbag everything. Now, this term sandbagging was actually invented to describe a Chinese 19th century tea trading practice where they would literally stuff bags of sand into larger tea shipments in order to cheat the weight at the ports. So, yeah, I mean, look, they. Here's the thing: if you're looking at the stats, there's like a big report from a couple of years ago. They systemically under invoice exports to South Africa by 30 to 60%, completely evading all excise duties and customs and excise duties and VAT. And in the previous 6 years, they in the last 6 years we've lost over 100 billion rand in tax revenue just from Chinese trading, and then you also lose money through capital flight because the Chinese have something called the Hanfei. Uh, what's it called? Fei Chia. I think what's that name for the flying money they've got? So they've
No
got this
idea.
thing where you transfer money by means of distant ciphered credit. So I deposit money with a guy, and then he sends a ciphered message to a guy on the other side of the world, and they hand off that money to someone on the other end. But
Okay.
they don't do
Got
this
you.
through this through banking systems or uh, usual digital methods. There's a similar one for the Pakistanis, which is why organized crime in South Africa is dominated by Chinese and Pakistanis, because they have these sort of opaque financing mechanisms. So now we're also seeing at the same time, due to, and this is not the Chinese that have done this, we've done this, we've broken um, our manufacturing sector completely. And ArcelorMittal, they inherited ISCOR, but now they're having to close like Newcastle and Saldanha and all of these places, right? Um, but now the Chinese are swooping in and they're building their own steel mills. So they're building one in I think Richards Bay, and then there's one up in Joburg. Um, so I mean, and then of course they do it with foreign labor. So they're well known for being extremely ruthless in how they deal with labor. I mean, they will traffic people and keep them on a compound in sort of semi-slave like conditions. And this will happen in South Africa, and there've been a few cases where they've been caught, people from Malawi or whatever. So it doesn't benefit local labor, it doesn't benefit the people who are working there, it doesn't benefit our tax system. There's no way in which you
Yeah.
benefit from trading with the Chinese. They're very,
So
very bad for you. And not
so
only
to
that, but
basically
they've infiltrated our policing and security systems for years now. They do annual inspections of our military, right? They get invited in to come and look at everything, right? They're generals. They also, where they've settled since about 2013, we've had dedicated police services which have to learn Mandarin so that they can give priority service to Chinese settlers. Because, if you this is following actually an incident I think in the mid 2000s where there was someone who was well connected who was hijacked and murdered in a very brutal way, a Chinese person, and so now they've gotten special attention from police because of Jacob Zuma. So that's been going
so
on for a long while.
overall,
They was-
overall it's going to be a net negative, and
yeah, it's
we're
a
going to
negative.
lose out, and there's going to be increased slavery. There's already the latest decent statistics say we have 158,000 slaves in South Africa right now. 158,000, like genuine, legitimate slaves, where
Yeah.
either you cannot leave your work, or under threat of loss of pay, which is still forced slavery. So we're
Oh
going to
well,
have
quite. Yeah.
increase that. There's going to be loss of money. There's going to be just a net negative in as we are pivoting eastward, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, but there's some interesting stuff as well because I mean, like Stellenbosch University has helped develop a quantum satellite link with Beijing, which is the longest one in the world. So it's very impressive, and the guys at Stellenbosch are doing great work from a technical standpoint. But what this serves is it becomes a backdoor communication for Pretoria to have words with Beijing without the eavesdropping of Washington, which good for you. Like pursue your interests and what have you. But
They're not pursuing our interests, and we need to
no, they're not.
pursue our own
No, they're not.
interests.
They're not.
We have to exert our own efforts and organize ourselves to pursue our own
Yeah.
interests.
But I mean, like you got to look at this. Like China is now accounting for a larger share of African imports than any other source, right? So they are growing. It's going to be growing, and like the CIPS service that this renminbi trading service that Standard Bank is doing with China. That's you got to. So Standard Bank actually has a capital control system similar to South Africa. We used to have this trading rand and the domestic rand. They have the renminbi and the yuan, right? So they've got these two different trading currencies. So they use this to sort of ring fence their economy, so that if a local economy, and they've also got like provincially ring fenced banking systems, so they can do like massive, brutal quantitative easing things in local areas in the country, um, which it's not a bad way to manage things in some respects, but you create distortions in the system that are difficult to correct for when you run an economy like that. It muddies the waters a lot. The nice thing about an old fashioned tax and spend sort of redistribution model is that the effects are linear and observable, and you can tell what's going on. Whereas if you use inflation in a sort of post Keynesian paradigm to redistribute wealth and resources within a political economy, you create a lot of invisible secondary effects and a lot of blurry effects in terms of who's benefiting from what, mainly driven by the Cantillon system and effect and a couple of other things. But that's for another day. I think one of the big problems here is that we're seeing this in this South Africa is becoming increasingly prostituted. It's not just
Yeah,
that like China is doing what it's doing. It's also that we're seeing Rothschild Capital's made a massive return uh, to South Africa under Ramaphosa, and they become the number one beneficiary of BEE contracts with the government. And they're coordinating the investment for Operation Vulindlela, which is this multi billion rand investment. I mean, we've talked about Walmart before the show. Walmart's becoming a big issue as well. They're expanding. They bought out about a decade ago. They bought out Massmart,
mass
which
mart.
includes Game and
Yeah,
Macro and so on. And so now they have this infrastructure here. And at the time, they said they were not using it as a beachhead to penetrate South Africa. But obviously, that's a lie. I mean,
yeah,
almost 10 years to the day, they come in and they start rebranding stores and testing out new models and seeing if they can outperform their competitors in Pick and Pay and Checkers and so on, right? And the key thing about Walmart is that their main strategy in most places is loss leading. So they look at the regional pricing around their stores, and then they undercut everybody by subsidizing that store to drop their prices. And when all of their competitors go out of business, they jack them back up again. So what they do is they destroy the outlying economy, and by becoming the sole distributor of comestibles and consumer goods, they can now pressurize suppliers and say, well, who else are you going to sell to? This is the price. So being able to dictate the price through a monopoly position, given that they've got the deepest pockets of any retail industry that are operating here besides Amazon, it's going to be a system whereby our retail and our online distribution is going to be completely captured by American monopolies, while all of our manufacturing and primary resource extraction is going to be gradually captured by the Chinese. So, and the old British sort of connected oligarchs like Rothschild Capital and the Oppenheimers and so on, those fellas are going to be are going to be more deeply capturing the public development sphere, taking over from where the Guptas left off. So, but obviously in a more stylish and refined and legally compliant manner, which, however unethical, will certainly not violate any laws strictly described, because they're smart like that. They're not completely idiotic, but it is an unfortunate and it's an unfortunate sort of circumstance, because from what I can see, these investment deals are not changing the shape of the economy, which is necessary to develop. You need to change the shape of the economy by developing new sectors. But what I'm seeing is a degrading. We are not moving up the value chain. We're not manufacturing things that are more and more complex. We are manufacturing fewer things. We are providing fewer, um, fewer serious complex services that are tied to those industries. Instead, we are providing evanescent services that can evaporate with the business cycle, tourism, consulting, and so on. So I don't think that we are doing very good. Even if the numbers are still not disastrous, we are weakening and hollowing our economy out, and I don't like it.
And I mean, the way forward is, I mean, we say this, but people need to right now, consider how they can pursue the interests of their own community. People need to start talking and organizing and building independent whatevers. We need to start taking this very seriously.
Well,
and
quite,
of
but I
and
think
obviously
my
it's
my main
difficult. No, I mean it's difficult. We're in a very difficult situation, but uh, you can still do something. And trying something and failing is better than trying nothing at all, right?
quite my position on this matter is that in order to work effectively, if we wants political interests in society, one must first emotionally divorce oneself from the party political system. It's like a pantomime show in many ways. You see a lot of back and forth and bickering over superficial issues, and everything looks very serious because it involves big ceremonial institutions like a parliament.
But
But for
it's just
example,
all a show.
let's take
Yeah.
black economic empowerment right now. There's a big show that the DA is making of reforming BEE. They're very, very opposed to it. But what they're doing is they're chucking another private member's bill on the parliament floor, right? And that never works. They've done it 50 times, and every time they charge some bright spark legal consulting fees that they can benefit from, and some rising star in the DA gets to write the bill so that they can look good on their CV and show that they've done some stuff, right? And then the bill goes nowhere and it gets shredded, right? So the Parliament's inbox for the DA is basically a shredder, okay? And then I mean, you look at this now. I mean, if you watched, they came and said, well, oh, why doesn't Mr. Mashatile back our solution to all of these things? And I go, very simply because he doesn't want to. And why should he listen to you? You're a minority partner in the government, and when you've outlived your usefulness, then they will return. I mean, people forget this, but socialist governments across the world have often, very often, endorsed temporary programs of liberalization, either economically or politically or however, before going back to a hardline position. Now, the Soviet Union under Stalin had the new economic plan, which involved a lot of turnkey operations carried out by large scale American industrial companies. General Electric built the entire city of Magnitogorsk. You've got people. Modernizing their oil extraction processes. They gave a near monopoly concession to Standard Oil, right? That's the Rockefeller family, right? Army Hammer. You know that actor Army Hammer, right? His grandfather was an extremely wealthy pro-communist businessman who, as part of this little bonanza, which was organized by the American government, they helped a lot because they also sort of gave these um, low interest loans to the Russians to facilitate this business, right? So he got, Arm and Hammer brings aluminium smelting to Russia, and so they get industrialized. Their industrial output surges, I think it was 800% in 12 years. It's like absolutely stratospheric growth, right? Really, 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 really big, impressive stuff, right? It's turnkey operations, and you think, well, really? It's all private capital, and it's all very beneficial and all that. And then when they're done sort of pinching out all of the European powers and breaking up their empires and carving up Africa between the two of them, then they turn on each other. And then in the 1970s, Soviets run out of cheap oil, and they're no longer a threat to the Americans anymore. And America starts to shut down all of the sort of authoritarian compromise regimes they've been doing business with, including South Africa, right? They tell us we need to wind down. And so we start for the reform process from 1977. And the Soviets start a sort of race to the finish line to try and get influence before they have to reform themselves. And once they start reform from 85, it's all over. Gorbachev is coming to the ANC and telling them, no, 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 you can't do hard socialism now. You're going to have to wait, and all of this kind of stuff because the big, global system is coming. Now, the ANC is weak. They need to go to the DA to support them and shore up some of their sort of connective tissue in the civil service. But once the DAs outlive their usefulness, they will be gone. There is no way that the ANC will accept junior partner status with the DA, and they don't have to. There are other partners in the political system that they can go to. It's very simple. There's no reason why they should. And you're starting to see people covering Mashatile, liberal outlets and commentators trying to cover Mashatile in a positive light. Now, the reason they would do this, despite the fact that Mashatile has close ties to the MK and the EFF, and the reason, and despite the fact that he is a very, very firm proponent of some of the more radical positions here, is that they've realized that there isn't really another option. Now, they can try and say, egg Patrice Motsepe on to join the race, but I sincerely doubt whether he will even run, and I sincerely doubt whether the Ramaphosa liberal candidate Toko Rodiza will be able to perform very well. Mashatile already has his patronage network; he has what he has, and I think that in some ways commentators have given up because when News 24 dropped their book about Mashatile's sort of dark empire, they call him the Dark Prince or whatever, it's like they just made him seem smart and cool and Machiavellian, and nobody cared because everyone knows they're all crooks. Making him seem scary actually makes him seem stronger. Ramaphosa, everyone knows he's a crook, but the reason that they don't respect him is because he looks weak. He looks like a big loser, right? So he's not going to win. Mashatile, he looks like a dark horse. He looks like he's going to come and shank you. So there's a sort of like, there's a bit of like sexiness to his position right now. He's going
So
to be.
what should the freedom? Okay, so I like the Freedom Front. As I've said on this podcast, I have voted DA for 15 years up until 2024, but I am moving away from them now. So now I'm looking for another party to support and get involved with potentially. So Freedom Front, Dr. Corne Mulder seems like quite a serious person, and he's been around for a long time.
I like him.
So what do you think the Freedom Front should do in such a situation? And if we all next year vote and swing to someone like the Freedom Front, we move away from DA because they're heading in the wrong direction. We move towards someone like Freedom Front and we back them in the polls. Like what could they do?
So now what I'm worried about is okay. This is going to be. I am answering the question, but I'm going to have to do it in a slightly roundabout way.
Oh, come on, Rob! You must just be direct,
man. Okay, the direct answer is vote for the Freedom Front Plus. They're a good party. I'd encourage you also to vote for like the Referendum Party or whatever. But let's just answer and say they're a good endorsement. Okay, they're a good endorsement. They're not perfect. There are a lot of things that I'll criticize about them, but I consider them to be a good vote. Right.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, a good vote, right? You're not gonna. It's nothing you're gonna deeply regret. So, and that's even if you're a moderate. If you're a political moderate and you just want someone who's going to do business and get on with things, they're Christian Democrats basically, right? They're they're kind of old fashioned. They're not very market absolutist. They're not very hardline conservative, actually, as much as they might look it. They're just sort of very Afrikaans. So, but my roundabout
Although
answer
they
would
have
be my more
pivoted
complete
to,
answer. My
yeah,
more
yeah,
complete
yeah.
answer is a very important one. So, this is something I saw from when you must watch what the Social Research Foundation publishes, because they are they show what the sort of, I hate using this term because it doesn't really describe ideas. It just describes sort of positions in hierarchy and the political landscape. But the sort of center right top elite, right? They represent the voices of that. Now, Social Research Foundation have a lot of their polling is conducted together with Victory Research. Now, that's Gavin van Onselen. Gareth van Onselen. Is it Gavin or Gareth? I keep forgetting.
Gareth.
Let's say Gareth. Gareth van Onselen is a deep DA loyalist. Like, he hates anything to the right of the DA, and he hates it. He literally just, there's nothing that he will tolerate or consider reasonable outside of the DA, right? 100% like loyalist to the party. But he's also the country's only serious talented pollster, right? And you'll find over and over again that he gets recruited by the Institute of Race Relations, by the Social Research Foundation, whatever, to do these polls. So he designs the polls and the questionnaires and the canvassing and all of this kind of stuff, right? And so when the polls come out from the SRF, you're seeing something that's happening there at the nexus of all of these things. Now, a lot of it has been sort of cheerful. They're looking for cheerful responses supporting ANC DA coalitions at the local level. And Ryan Coetzee recently admitted that he was trying to broker a coalition with the ANC, coalitions with the ANC in Gauteng, before the ANC went with Action SA. Now, I mean, if you want to understand how underhanded some of those deals were, one of them, the one that really made Action SA go off the deep end and become this frothing at the mouth anti-white loony party, right, is a deal in which Helen Zille was offering the ANC a mutual supply and confidence agreement. So the idea was that, so none of them have a majority in any of the municipalities, but ANC is the biggest party in Ekurhuleni, and the DA was the biggest party in Tshwane. And so what they wanted to do was have the was support the ANC as a minority government in Ekurhuleni, right? So they could govern alone without the EFF, in exchange for letting the DA get rid of all of its coalition partners in Tshwane and govern alone there. So now this was a stab in the back for all of the coalition partners in Pretoria, and this pissed off everybody. But none more so than Action SA, who thought, well, look, we don't like you, and we have our bitterness because most of them are ex-DA members. Okay, we're bitter and twisted about the DA for a number of reasons, both personal and political. But we're going to swallow our vomit and do a deal with the DA, and the DA stabs them in the back like this, right? But the idea, if you look at how the thought is, and you go back to that interview uh, with Helen Zille at Chatham House in 2012, where she says the ideal is a merger with the ANC, right? You create a party of permanent status quo, and then you shut down any opportunity for new parties to form, right? And you say, oh, you got to vote for us, or else it's Mugabe. This is the model that she has. She wants to have a system where it's, there's a DA ANC and there's an EFF ANC. And the minorities are going to have to panic and sit in this corner and hope that they will get a good version of the ANC, which is going to become more and more left-wing and draconian and bureaucratic and sclerotic over time. But the DA will make sure that they persecute people who deviate from the bad policies, right? Because that's what they're like. They're all like Dolores Umbridge from the bloody Harry Potter books. So this is the model that they have, and they want to. And what I'm worried about is there's this awful, awful, horrible gamble that we're going to have to make going into the next couple of elections. If the DA starts losing, and they lose enough that they're going to have to go into coalition with someone, there is a very big chance that they broker a deal with the ANC in order to shut out all of the opposition parties. Now, the other opposition parties have a very limited capital base to draw from for donations. And that means that the amount of time that their councillors and their candidates spend outside of office is detrimental to their tenure on that candidate list. Many of them cannot afford to continue being politicians or canvassing or campaigning or working for the party if they do not have those elected positions. The DA can afford to hand salaries to people to cross over, right? And they do this regularly. But here's the problem. It's so you get the situation where you can only participate in politics if you're a member of one of two or three political parties. And the DA want reforms, not that they're necessarily going to get them, but we will see. They want reforms in which they're going to introduce thresholds to the voting so the small parties cannot even get on the ballot. So this is a problem where you have to kind of make it it's make or break for the opposition. At the same time, we have a problem in the Vryheidsfront Plus, and it's a criticism I've uttered before, where the leadership looks at those polls that are designed to bolster the DA's strategy, right? And they act as if they think as if they're the DA, and they think in terms of the average man. Now, the average man doesn't exist. So the average man is, according to the numbers, according to the construct that arises from the numbers, is saying that they like the idea of a coalition of national unity. So the Vryheidsfront Plus look at this and they say, well, then we want to be super for this coalition of national unity because then we'll be popular. But this is entirely missing the reason why the Vryheidsfront Plus exists and why they have support. People vote for the Vryheidsfront Plus to see people who are going to be anti-corruption, who are going to hold the DA to account, who are going to rebel against the system and offer alternatives. By participating in the system, you undermine that message, and you are now trying to target people who consider you to be beyond the pale for ethnically prejudiced reasons. So that it is a very, very poor strategy of the Vryheidsfront Plus to be pursuing the center. They need to be pursuing the position, the true position, of being the only opposition party in the country. That is the brand at which they could sell themselves in the coming election if they chose to. We are the only opposition party in the country, but they do not have the guts to do this because they are being held down by the lead weight that is Peter Groenewald. I'm convinced that he is the biggest problem that the party has, uh, and his tenure and his ability to command loyalty from certain factions in the north mean that he has to be negotiated with on policy decisions going forward. Now, I trust that Corne Mulder wants the right thing, but does he have enough leverage or clout to override people like Peter Groenewald? I don't know. It's a big question. So, but should you vote for the Vryheidsfront Plus? I think yes. Yeah, it would be great. They actually care, and I'll tell you one thing. I mean, the local guys in the Cape, they definitely care. Now, occasionally the northern leadership will come and squash the rebellious types in the Cape because they irritate the DA, and the guys at the top want to keep cordial relationships in the GNU. But guys down here do generally care about corruption, and we've recently seen a report revealed that confirms and vindicates Jean van Schalkwyk, who made it his life's work to keep the DA in check in Swellendam. And he had all kinds of slime thrown at him, false police charges, all kinds of fabricated allegations coming from the DA and their friends in the local area, right? And they finally got rid of him by having negotiations through the top. Now, the municipal manager who's being accused of corrupt behavior right now, there were three DA councillors who strongly morally objected to her appointment for a number of reasons, right? And Helen Zille intervened to have them kicked out of the party for objecting to her. And it is the loss of these three seats that actually led to the two seats that two of the seats that the councillors were on that caused the DA to have to go into coalition with the Vryheidsfront Plus and thus bring Jean van Schalkwyk in as speaker. And when he was a speaker, the first thing he did is he said, well, look, we have this norm across the municipalities in most areas where we pick a member of the opposition to be head of the finance committee, chair the finance committee, so they can oversee and make sure that, okay, well, we are actually looking into any kind of irregularities. The DA howled in outrage. We are not going to have oversight. We're going to have one of our own who we can discipline and punish if they see any, if they try to report on any misdeeds, because this is how the DA works. If you are caught for corruption by the DA, you do not report even internally that there's corruption. They will not tolerate it. They have kicked people out for this, right? Look at Johan Brummer. They kicked him out of the party in 2011 for complaining to Helen Ziller and Anton Bredell that there was corruption coming from Malusi Boy's office. Now, they immediately fabricated a deficit of party dues, which Brummer fought in the court for nearly 10 years and won at a cost of millions on the DA's side of the ledger. Right? They fought really, really hard to get rid of him. And they protected Malusi Boy for years and years and years, transferring him laterally from Plettenberg Bay's B2 municipality up to the district municipality of Gardenroute, and the crookery continued. None of the municipal staff that were involved in siphoning money out or irregular property deals were ever prosecuted or and were only properly investigated when the Hawks started leaning on Anton Bredell for overlooking this stuff. And as a way of dealing with this, they promoted Malusi Boy to the parliament, to provincial parliament, right? Not Malusi Boy, sorry, Memory Boyson. I got that name wrong. It's Memory Boyson. Damn it. It's Memory Boyson, not Malusi Boy. Please ignore me. Malusi Boy is another story where they knew about the involvement of his department with the 28th gang for building contracts, and they did nothing for 4 years. And when SAPS raided their office, they, oh my goodness, how could we have known? So this is typical ANC policy. They also did it with the former mayor of my own municipality, Conrad Poole, who was caught with a cash for jobs scandal, amongst many other things. And he was allowed to resign before the investigation took place and was promoted to the parliamentary list just in time to sit for the 2024 elections. So this is normal. And in Swellendam, it was 8 different contracts that have been placed under scrutiny. The Jean van Schalkwyk has been broadly vindicated, and the amount of slander that he was dealt is quite severe. He unfortunately lost the case. Lost the case that was ruled that he was procedurally incorrect in removing the mayor so that investigations could continue. So not removing the mayor, removing the municipal manager so that she could be properly investigated, right? And honestly, I'm not sure exactly why that was incorrect, but procedure is procedure. You've got to follow procedure. And as a result, he got removed, and they decided the report was invalid. Goes on and on and on. But yeah, no, this is a big problem. And I'll tell you what. In order to deal with Van Schalkwyk, the leadership came and just removed him. And this ended what was actually an ongoing war between Vryheids van Plus and the DA for about a year, where because of attempting to hold them to account for misdeeds in Oudtshoorn, the DA threatened to kick them out of every single hung municipality in the province. So the DA does not like legal accountability. And from my perspective,
so our biggest tricky situation is actually that the DA they are happy to merge with the ANC. Like, that's the critical point. If the DA actually wanted to have some form of open debate, dialogue where sort of parties can move in and out, then they wouldn't do that. If they wanted, quote unquote, democracy or whatever you want to call it, where other parties could potentially come in and lead. If they wanted actually movement, they wouldn't be doing this. But our critical issue here is that they will very easily jump into bed with the ANC if they start coming.
If they start be cautious about it, though. I think they're going to be cautious about it. I don't think it's guaranteed that they're necessarily going to jump into it straight away, but you can see that they're preparing the ground for it, right?
Yeah.
So, but by testing the waters with these kind of polling, if they're asking these questions, this shows their intention. Because Gareth van Onselen is part of the inside circle. He's the one who's running these polls and designing them. So, if they're running that poll, that's something that they want to do. So, you watch what they're doing. This is what they want to do. They want to cement coalitions. Now, the idea is, if you govern, these two parties are governing together, right? This is how the DA are seeing it. And so we can have these parties governing together forever, never, ever, ever moving apart. Maybe someday, the ANC will become the junior partner, then we can take control of the country, as which is bizarre because having minority rule in a democratic society is going to look really bad, right? So that is not going to last. It's going to look really bad. And their ability to control sort of black candidates is not good, right? It's not good, and eventually those black candidates get out of control. But then by that point, it's well, I mean, it's understandable. I mean, do you really, really want to be controlled by English liberals? It's yeah, no. But what I'm sort of saying over here, that where was I? Oh yeah, my Mane era. Oh yeah, so like the easy commentators were saying things like, "Okay, well now we're going to get a two-party system," and I thought that was a fantastically interesting comment because if you look at say the United Kingdom or the United States for most of the 20th century, you've got two parties, and the core policies remain the same, and the reforms are never reversed. Right? There's like this place that we all understand that we're going, and you get a little bit more welfare if you vote for these guys, and you get a little bit more tax breaks if you vote for these guys. But broadly speaking, we're going here, right? And long-term positions are identically complete continuity, right? Complete continuity. And so you have a single party that has two factions that you can vote for, but you can't vote for a new party. And this is the idea, is that now we are becoming a country where we are all the ANC. You can vote for different flavors of ANC, but you're going to get ANC. This is and this has been like this. It has been decided. You are going to get ANC. You can get ANC with Western style corporate key performance indicators, or you can get ANC with radical redistribution and your labor protests and all that kind of stuff. But you're going to get ANC. This is the view, and
Yeah, so it's like
I
Tory
think
and Labour, like
yeah, but it's
or
slightly
yeah,
different to
yeah.
that
No, I
because
get what
we're
you're
not a
saying.
first past the post system, right? So it's going to look different. So now what's interesting is looking at Leon Schreiber. Now, Leon Schreiber's been handed a lot of responsibility, but his thing is he's obsessed with Brazil, and he thinks Brazil's the best country in the world. They've run, like, for a developing country, that's the best model, is you allow people to do land invasions, you have big slums, you give away money for free, you lock out any new parties and prospective parties from participating in parliament, you persecute any politician who tries to run on a ticket of reform, and you protect people from the most massive corruption scandal on the history of the planet, and promote them, them to run over and over and over again, right? So this sort of disgusting, corrupt, violent mess is the ideal form of government that we should be comparing ourselves to. They're not that different from how we are. Like, there's no real special thing going on there, right? Except that there's more free cash being splashed about, you know, and that the land invasion process is a little bit more formally welcomed in certain areas. So there really is nothing to go on here that suggests that people are thinking creatively or seriously. But Brazil offers an interesting, because they have this problem with this thing of like the center. Like, the center is a couple of parties that govern together forever, right? And they're this absolute monument. I mean, there's a new party that's sort of like managed to edge their way in now, of young buggers who are very serious. And I might do a little special video on that on them at some point, because we need to start looking at serious alternatives here. But I think to understand what's going on now, it's trying to see how the leadership of the parties are looking at things is the most important thing. And then you have to kind of look at who's in their social circle, who run allied institutions that do communicate various things, right? Because that's kind of how I look at it. So, yeah, where am I going? Okay.
No, no. Look, I think,
B.
I mean, it's a very astute observation, and if I can just draw your attention quickly to what's happening, I mean, just to illustrate this point,
Mm,
is if you look what's happening with Reform UK and Nigel Farage, you're seeing actually a very similar thing where um, it's very likely he's going to come in, right? In that after this Labour government, he's going to come in, but he's not going to come in and bring the major reforms that Britain needs. He's not going to do that. What I think is going to happen is that Conservative Party are basically going to morph into the reform, and then you just are going to have the continuation of the Conservative Party with Nigel as the head and with the reform, and then you're going to have Labour. So they're basically going to reset back to this Labour Conservative two-party system. So, but what's happened, interesting, is as Conservative has died, it's almost been reborn. And with Nigel, that's why Rupert Rowe, what's it, Rupert
Rupert
Lowe,
Lowe.
he was sort of axed, right? Because he's the only one there who would actually be able to bring about the reforms that Britain needs. Um, but Nigel Farage won't do it. He's not a true conservative. I can see it. He's a very squishy guy. So what's interesting is we're seeing this like a similar thing play out there where the elites still want to keep this two-party system, but for a moment there's been a bit of a chaos. There's been a bit of insecurity now with Nigel and all these things going on. But
Mm.
I think Nigel is going to come in. I think it's essentially going to become the new Conservative Party. And then you're going to go back to this two-party system and the reforms that people are hoping that Nigel and the reform will do. He's not going to do it. I really don't think he's going to be able to do it. And then you're going to have Rupert Lowe, who actually could do it. He's now sitting on the outside. So there's a very similar thing happening, if you think about it.
I mean, it's tough because we don't even have that. I mean, we sort of got a political system within a political system within a political system, and it's very hard to become the tail that wags the dog. I've I mean, I think the problem is then you have to sort of there's this weird thing that's happened since the DA came into government where we stopped looking at the ANC's plans, so to speak. We've stopped looking at them in that way, but they're still there. I mean, like one of the big ones now that I think we need to pay attention to is, I mean, there's two. There's the BEE reforms, right, and the Firearms Act. So they're already trying to rebrand this firearms control amendment bill. That it was withdrawn in 2021 after it attracted over 150,000 public objections. Like everyone was like, "No, this is a fucking horrific idea," right? So they've got everyone's a man and his dog agrees, and you should Gideon Uber and all of these people, right? And so some of this text has been leaked because they're under discussion at NEDLAC, and they're trying not to expose it to any kind of public scrutiny, and they're trying to keep it under wraps. So it's very important that people go and check that out and voice their concerns. But what the key reform that they want to do, which is really scary, is that they're trying to take away your right. So you've got to provide a reason for having a firearm. And one of the reasons that they're ruling out is self-defense. You have to prove that your self-defense situation is extreme, right? So you have to prove that you are in a very acute, extreme condition that you live in, which requires you to have self-defense. But like, what counts as extreme in South Africa? The whole country's in the most nightmarish situation. So I just don't. It's very obvious that this is just an attempt to grab people's guns away, and people need them. It's through the use of firearms that people manage to defend themselves and keep themselves alive in many cases. Um, and there's no threat. I mean, like, it doesn't matter how many studies you read. There is no threat to public safety from legal firearms owners. People who are willing to jump through the hoops to fill out the paperwork are not going on rampages. They're not smuggling drugs. They're not shooting up street corners, right? So targeting these people it's obviously bad. It's obviously spiteful, right? This is like, because I know that the sort of like typical person is just like a middle class white guy, you know, or a middle class Indian guy or whatever, and they're going like, yeah, but we can't have those people defending themselves. But yeah, and I mean, it's funny because we just came. It's speaking of violent crime, we just got this report from Enact, which is it's an organization funded by the EU, which does like really nice, really lovely, detailed data on violent crime across Africa. And their latest organized crime report has put South Africa at the absolute tip top. So we apparently are the worst for organized crime on the continent. Now, like it's mind-boggling, really. You know, we're sitting in this position now. I mean, even if 5 or 6 years ago we were not in this place, you know, we are now the worst, and it's a very recent development, you know. Um, so I don't know what to say about this. It, it's pre- it, I mean, look, it's a complicated index where they look at various signs of things, and you can say, okay, well, some of these things are overreported because of the prevalence of functioning institutions, and some things may not be weighted in a certain way or whatever. But look, even if we're a few sort of positions down, the fact that we've turned out, even if it's a biased reading this way, it's like things are really horrendously bad, and it can't go on like this. Um, but I don't see this changing. I mean, when you look at the BEE reforms that are going through, right, the economy is going to remain stagnant, the corruption is going to remain there, and so the ability to sort out anything in the criminal justice system is just not going to happen, as far as I can tell. And uh, I mean, we had this thing. I mean, I mentioned, you know, the DA getting excited about, oh, why don't they vote for our bill? I mean, like, um, because who cares? You know, like, no one has to. And so Mashatile and Parks Tau talked about reforming the BEE legislation. But the only things that are really new recently is stuff that Sarkelig has been fighting. And you should look at Sarkelig's reports on what they call third wave BEE, right? So third wave BEE is basically they go after the licensing. So the way that you enforce BEE currently, right, is through procurement services. So the state is worth a third of the economy. So a lot of big companies have to do business with the state in order to make money, right? Or at least that's where a lot of the opportunities are. And as a result, you get a lot of these big companies that are now compliant with BEE because you have to have a BEE score in order to get tenders. But now here's the other thing: that BEE score is not based on the structure of your company alone, but also your contractors. So it has a second order validity. And then those contractors, their BEE score relies on their contractors and so on. So it has this broad network effect on the whole economy, right? And so it is a public procurement that the rubber hits the road. But that still leaves a small sliver of the economy unaffected, right? Middle class, low, you know, like these middle class small businesses, right? Where some minorities can go out and make a living without giving themselves, you know, looking for a stranger they can't trust as a business partner, right? And without hiring for race rather than skill, there's like this tiny bubble. So now they're hitting this hard because the enforcement mechanism are now going to be based on licensing, so you won't be able to do business at all. They're closing that loop, and once they've closed that loop, they're going to tighten and tighten and tighten. And now there's a guy, I believe his name is Kerm. Now, I'm going to actually share this. Hold on. There's a fellow on Twitter he's got a.
Dude, can I? Sorry, man. Can I tap out at this point? I got ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I
You
think
carry on.
run along because you know the time. Because I'm just going to share this. Thanks
Go
for
for it.
coming on, Dave. I appreciate it. Yeah,
Have a good day, brother. Chat soon.
cheers, man.
Cheers.
All right. So now the fellow I wanted to sort of share with you is that now I've run something by him before, but he's a fairly small account on X, and he has this fantastic formula that he worked out. So he showed he's demonstrated the effect of BEE. We understand what it really does because we are not insane. The employment equity and the BEE and all of this is making it much, much more difficult to find work or do business as a minority. And as a result, you're going to have to go leave the country if you want to survive, right? Or stay employed. And so but here's what happens. I'm going to share screen. Bum 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 bum. Here we go. I don't know if you can see that, but look at this guy. So, assuming the number of employees, okay, roughly equaling the number of white employees, right? So, sorry, my maths is very rusty, so I'm going to sound like a retard trying to read these formulae. So, immigration reduces the proportion of white people, right? And then you've got the proportion of white people plus 1 equals a proportion of white people multiplied by the fractional reduction due to immigration driven by the policy. So then, if that portion is greater than 0 at all, over time, the white population approaches 0% of the total population as you increase that. So, if there's this is the sort of general problem that you have with it, is that it's a progressive method of working you out of the economy. Now, James Mayberg did this fantastic series for his site Politics Web years ago, where he looked at a comparable policy used in Indonesia to work the Dutch out. And eventually they were at the point where they literally couldn't earn work or even purchase stuff anywhere and had to flee with the clothes on their back. Now, this is the future that you are headed for, my friends, if you do not do something about it. And it'll come slowly and painfully, but it will come. And don't let anyone tell you that, Africans only think of tomorrow or today. They think of eternity. They have all the time in the world. And that is the mentality that people are missing, that idea of having all the time in the world. They're much more patient culturally than people give them credit for. And it's a quality that we do not have. We're an extremely impatient people. And so if we do not see ourselves as like the plan is in place and is moving forward and things are happening, then we think, okay, well, then it's not, then nothing's happening, and we start panicking. But in Africa, it's not the same, because eventually all things return to the mean. Everything regresses to the mean eventually. And that's a deep that things will, sort of come right in a sense. And there's a quote that's attributed to Robert Mugabe, but I can't actually place it, where he was told about the mines. Oh, if you take away the mines from, the whites, then you won't be able to mine. And he says, look, the minerals were in the ground before the white man came, and they'll be there 100,000 years in the future. We have all the time in the world to mine it on our own when we choose. And I think that just about sums up the liberation movement's perspective on this, right? Um, and there's a lot of disrespectful thinking that we have about our African neighbors, which I think is not warranted. There's a lot of very careful thought and that goes into a lot of this stuff, even though it looks absolutely bananas. I think one of the things that we've lost is the ability to endure sacrifice for a greater goal. So for us, anything that does involve sacrifice for a greater goal looks bananas unless it's very acute and the risk of overshoot is low, and it's like, oh, but the idea of collective suffering for a greater good is something that white people don't do anymore. We've stopped enduring that for our own interest completely. And there's this idea of collective, oh, yes, near collective suffering that's not really suffering, but for others. Um, that's fine. And you can get that in some on the left. But you won't have this solidarity approach. That is something that we've lost. We lost it a long time ago. I think it died with the world wars, more or less. Um, very of the old world. But I mean, that's it. I mean, look, we're still in a position where we're not dead. We're still breathing, and we're still here. And while we are still here and we're still fighting, we've still got stuff to do. We are going to do it. And so I've started dip my toe into political organizing now myself. Where I'm helping host an event tomorrow night in Fishhook to deal with the land reform process that's happening over there. It's a spatial development program designed to expand a squatter camp in a way that will facilitate the expropriation of private property in a unfortunately situated suburb. Now, it's understood by the spatial development plan that the squatter camp is supposed to spread into the neighboring suburbs and absorb it. And it's actually painted on the map in the spatial development plan, which is frightening, really. So I'm going to be there, and I invited Phil Craig of the Referendum Party and Peter van Vuren of the Vryheidsfront Plus, and there will also be Jack Miller of the Cape Independence Party. And we're going to, this will not be a stump campaign. The idea is that we're going to sit and use what institutional foothold we do have to try and help solve this problem and to try and at least slow it down, if not stop it completely. And hopefully look for solutions that might help solve the problem going forward, might help ameliorate the problem going forward. Okay. And currently, tickets are almost sort of, I almost said sold out. They're free. It's just sort of trying to control event capacity. So we were pretty much full up now, so it should be interesting. I haven't managed to organize any recording equipment, so we probably won't be able to stream it or anything. But I'll do a little write up or something when it's done, so that everyone will know what's been happening. And hopefully, my idea is that given that this is the current core base of these political parties, this kind of like middle class sort of white community, by introducing this kind of forum model to them, I can hopefully move them to do this with another community who I've been trying to get help for a long time in Eersterivier, and get them to come down and sit in a field and listen to a bunch of subsistence farmers complain about how the city has been choking off their water illegally and threatening their grants and doing all kinds of stuff to try and move them. It's a long story. But Itemba Small Farms is on my list to get to, and once I've managed to get these guys to work on Fishhook, I can hopefully refocus them onto Itemba Small Farms. And that's where I'm going now. But Yeah, there's not much going on. There's not a hell of a lot of big, impactful things going on that I haven't mentioned. There are a couple of small things that are here and there. Um, the DA trying to support a parliamentary, they're supporting a parliamentary inquiry into crime in Cape Town. This was a motion by the EFF, but yeah, and then there's notice that we're having massive tourist influx. There's efforts for packaging. The packaging sector is trying to get investment overseas, and a few little things like this. Um, there's some discontent about the draft business licensing bill, um, which I'm going to have to look into when I have some time and maybe do a little write up, because there's some contest between Ivan Mayer and the national department at the moment, which might have some impact. But other than those items, I think that we're mostly done. And all I want to say is have a nice lunchtime, and chin up. We will figure this all out eventually. I think. Well, all right. Thank you so much.